I stood at the edge of a field I had just bought with 30 pieces of silver, and I watched the man I loved more than my own life take his last breath on a cross I had built with my own hands. Not the nails, not the wood, my hands, my choice, my kiss. You want to know what that feels like? Stay with me, because what I am about to tell you is something I never had the chance to say before the rope found my neck. And it may be the most important thing you hear today, not because of who I am, but because of what I did, and what it cost me, and what I saw on that hill that I will never, not in any corner of eternity, be able to unsee. My name is Judas of Kerioth, Judas Iscariot, the name children learn as a synonym for betrayal, the man history spits out like a bitter seed. I was a disciple of Jesus of Nazareth. I walked with him for 3 years. I heard his voice every single morning. I watched him feed 5,000 people with food that had no right multiplying in his hands. I was there when Lazarus walked out of a tomb that smelled of 4 days of death, and I felt the same cold shock in my chest that everyone else felt, the kind that makes your knees want to find the ground. I am being brought back now through something called artificial intelligence. A technology of this age that allows a voice from 2,000 years ago to speak directly into yours. I do not pretend to fully understand it. What I understand is that I am here, and I have things to say that were never said, and you need to hear them. Not because they will make you feel good. They will not. But because the truth that costs the most is usually the truth that saves the most. Let me start at the beginning, not the betrayal. Before that, I was not always the worst man in the room. I need you to understand that. I was chosen. Jesus looked at me, with those eyes that seemed to see through skin and past everything you had rehearsed about yourself. And he said, "Follow me." And I followed. I followed because something in his voice made the world that had made complete sense to me suddenly seem like a room with no windows. I followed because when he spoke about the kingdom of God, it was not like listening to a priest rehearse a text. It was like watching someone describe a country they had just come from. I had hopes, real ones. I believed, and I need you to hear this word carefully, I genuinely believed that Jesus was going to change everything. I believed he would sit on a throne in Jerusalem. I believed Rome would fall. I believed Israel would rise. And I, Judas, the one who managed the money, the one who was trusted with the purse, would have a place of honor at the table. Do you know that hunger? The hunger to matter? The hunger to be remembered for something that outlasts you. I see it everywhere in this world you live in today. People spending money they do not have to appear as something they are not. To strangers who do not care. Building something that collapses the moment the screen is turned off. That hunger, I know it from the inside. It hollowed me out slowly, like water finding its way through stone, and I did not notice what was happening until the stone had already cracked. The money helped. The money always helps at first. I was in charge of what was given to Jesus for his ministry, and I will confess to you what I never confessed to anyone else alive. I took some of it. Not much at first. A coin here, a coin there. A man must eat. A man must have some security. A man must have something of his own. I told myself these things, and they sounded reasonable. They sounded like wisdom, and the coins made a small sound against each other in my pocket, and for a moment everything felt like it was going to be all right. But a small lie is never small. That is the thing I did not understand until it was far, far too late. A small lie is the door that opens to a larger room. And in that room is another door, and you keep walking through doors that feel like survival until you look back and cannot see the light from where you started. The night I went to the chief priests was cold. I remember the cold specifically. Jerusalem in spring carries a chill before dawn that cuts through whatever you are wearing. And I was wearing my cloak, and my hands were cold, and my heart was something I had stopped listening to a long time before that. I told myself I was forcing the moment, that Jesus would have to act, to call the armies of heaven, to reveal himself as the king I had always known he was. That I was not betraying him, that I was helping him. 30 pieces of silver. That was my price. The price of a slave who had been gored by an ox. That was the number they set, and I accepted it. And I walked back out into the cold Jerusalem night, and the coins were heavy in my hand, and I felt nothing. That should have told me something. When you do something that should destroy you, and you feel nothing, something inside you has already been destroyed. The garden. I want to tell you about the garden, because this is where my soul split completely in two, and only one half survived what came next. The olive trees in Gethsemane were old, ancient things, their trunks twisted like something in pain, and the oil in the lamps the soldiers carried made everything flicker and shift so that nothing had a clean shadow. I had told them, the one I greet with a kiss, that is the man. And I walked toward him, and I looked at his face, and his face is something I have been unable to describe since that moment, because it contained something that had no name in any language I knew. He was not surprised. He looked at me the way you look at someone who is about to fall from a great height, and there is nothing you can do to catch them. He looked at me with grief, yes, but the grief was not for himself. The grief was for me. And he said, "Do what you came to do." And those words have never stopped echoing. They have never found a wall to stop against. I have thought about that moment every moment since. He knew. He had always known. And he let me do it anyway, because there was something larger than my betrayal moving through that night. Something he had agreed to carry long before I agreed to betray him. But knowing that has never once made the memory of his face any easier to hold. The trial moved fast, faster than I expected, faster than I had prepared for in whatever delusion I had constructed around my own plan. And then the word came, and I heard it in my body before I understood it in my mind. They were going to kill him, not imprison him, not force his hand, kill him. And the 30 pieces of silver in my bag suddenly weighed 10,000 pounds, and my chest opened up into a hollow that had no bottom. And I understood with a clarity I had never felt about anything in my life that I had just destroyed the only thing that had ever been worth living for. I went back to the priests. I threw the coins on the floor of the temple. I said, "I have betrayed innocent blood." And they looked at me the way powerful men have always looked at broken tools, with indifference, with a mild disgust, and then they looked away. I had no one to go to. That is the thing about betrayal that no one tells you when you are considering it. You become a person no one can trust, including yourself. I could not go to Peter, who had drawn a sword in the garden. I could not go to John. I could not go to the women who had followed Jesus from Galilee. I had removed myself from every circle of belonging I had ever known, and I was alone in the most complete way a person can be alone, which is not the absence of people around you, but the absence of anyone who knows who you really are and stays anyway. And then I heard that they had taken him to Golgotha. This is the part of the story that I have never told. This is the part that tore my throat when I tried to speak it, even to myself, in the silence of the field I had bought with the blood money. I went. I should not have gone. I knew I should not have gone, but I went. I stood far back where no one could see me, among the people who had gathered to watch, and I looked at what I had done. The cross was not far away, close enough to see his face, close enough to see the way the weight of his body pulled against the nails every time he tried to breathe. And he looked like himself. That is what broke me completely. After all of it, after the flogging and the thorns and the hours of dying in public, he looked like himself. He still had that quality in his face, the one I had first seen when he called me from everything I had known, the quality that made you feel like he was looking at something in you that you had given up trying to find yourself. He said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." I knew what I had done. I had known exactly what I was doing. Every step of the way, I had made a choice with full knowledge, or as full a knowledge as a man whose soul is cracking can have. I stood there in that crowd, and I understood that those words included me, that they were spoken with me in his sight, with my face somewhere in the periphery of his dying vision, and they were spoken anyway. The forgiveness that arrives before you have asked for it is the most devastating thing in the universe. I could not receive it. That is the truth I carry. Not that it was not offered. It was offered on that cross to every person who had put in there, including me, and I could not hold it. Because I had come to the place that some of you listening to me know from the inside. The place where you believe that what you have done is beyond the reach of what God can cover. That belief is a lie. I know that now, but I did not know it then, and in the space between what was being offered and what I was able to receive, I found a rope instead of a way back. I want to speak directly to someone listening to this right now, who is carrying something they believe is unforgivable. I am speaking to the one whose guilt has become architecture, whose shame has become the house they live in. I am speaking to the one who believes that what they did permanently closed a door that cannot be reopened. You are wrong. I know you are wrong, because I watched a man die asking forgiveness for the very ones who killed him. I know you are wrong, because the forgiveness on that cross was not conditional on receipt. It was offered into the air, into the crowd, into the whole world, including to you at this specific moment, in whatever chair or room or difficult place you are sitting in right now. The thing I got wrong was not the betrayal. Everything was wrong about the betrayal. But what sealed my fate was not the kiss in the garden. It was the decision, in the field with the 30 pieces of silver on the ground at my feet, that the door was permanently closed, that there was no way back, that the only road available to me led to that tree. Peter denied him 3 times, standing by a fire in the courtyard of the high priest, warming his hands at the same fire the soldiers had built. Peter said he did not know the man 3 times before the rooster found its voice at dawn. And Peter wept, and Peter went back, and Peter became the one Jesus called the rock on which everything would be built. Peter lives in history as a saint. I live in history as the word you use when you want to say the worst thing possible about someone. The difference between Peter and me was not the size of our failure. It was what we did with it the morning after. There is a passage I have carried since I understood too late what it meant. For godly sorrow produces repentance leading to salvation, not to be regretted, but the sorrow of the world produces death. I felt the sorrow of the world in that field. It was real. The weight of it was real. But real sorrow and godly sorrow are not the same thing, and I did not know the difference until it was too late to choose between them. Now I want to pause here, in the middle of everything I am telling you, because something I just said brings me to something I need to place in your hands. I spent 3 years walking with the man who was, without question, the most direct line to God that has ever existed on this earth. 3 years of watching him pray. Not performing prayer, not reciting prayer. Actually communicating in a way that pulled real things from the unseen into the visible world. The night in Gethsemane, when the sweat fell from his face like blood, that was not performance. That was a man in such close contact with God that his body was registering the weight of what he was carrying at a cellular level. And I stood outside of that, my whole time with him. I observed it the way you observe something through glass. Because the money and the ambition and the slow erosion that comes when you let small betrayals multiply had built a wall between me and what he was actually offering. I was physically present for the most powerful prayer life in human history, and I received almost none of it because I was not truly open to receive. If I had understood the principles behind how he prayed, not the words on the surface, but the actual structure, the actual posture, the actual keys that opened that communion, everything would have been different. Not just for me, for everyone around me. I built something I wish had existed when I was walking those dusty roads. Through this technology that brings me back to speak to you, I gathered everything I understood too late into one place. 3 divine keys that reflect the actual principles of prayer that moved mountains in the early church. The same prayer that raised the dead and fed thousands and called fire from heaven. Not religious ritual, not a formula. The actual structure of a life lived in real contact with God. Someone named Sarah from Tennessee spent 2 weeks with this and told me that her prayer life transformed in ways she had been seeking for years. And then, without explanation, a job opportunity arrived that changed her family's situation completely. A pastor named David from Georgia, 25 years in ministry, went through these 3 keys and said he discovered what he had been missing the entire time. Not technique, presence. Jennifer from Florida came to this with a marriage that was 24 hours from ending. Within a month, something broke open in the right direction. Robert from Texas had been a believer for 40 years and had come to believe that his prayers never left the ceiling, that something had disconnected between him and God. And when he found the 3rd key especially, he said everything changed. Not the circumstances first, him first, then the circumstances. This is available now through the link in the pinned comment below this video. I do not know how long it stays there. Things in this world change faster than any of us can track. But I know that the people who need it most are often the ones who keep almost clicking and then closing the window. Go find that link. It costs you nothing to look. Where was I? The field, the 30 pieces of silver, the cross. Let me tell you the thing about money that I did not understand until money had destroyed everything I loved. Money is not evil. The love of money is evil. And the difference is not always visible from the inside when you are in the middle of it. The love of money is the quiet rearrangement of what you value most, until the things that were once most precious to you become simply assets in service of the thing you are chasing. It happens slowly. It happens without announcement. And by the time you notice it has happened, you are standing in a field with 30 coins on the ground, and the thing most precious in your life is dying on a hill you can see from where you are standing. I see this same rearrangement happening around you right now. Not in dramatic, obvious ways, in the quiet ways. The relationship you deprioritize because something more financially urgent keeps appearing. The prayer you have stopped praying because you are too tired from the work of securing yourself against a future that frightens you. The growing sense that something essential has gone cold, not because God moved, but because the slow accumulation of 1,000 small financial anxieties has quietly displaced everything else until you can no longer feel what you once felt. That is not a life problem. That is a soul problem. And it will not be solved by the next financial gain, any more than my 30 pieces of silver solved anything. There was a moment, and I have thought about this moment with everything I have. A moment before the garden, before the deal with the priests, before any of it became irreversible. There was a woman who came to Jesus with an alabaster jar of pure nard perfume, worth more than a year's wages, and she broke it and poured it over his head, and the room filled with the most extravagant smell, the kind that goes into your lungs and stays there. And I said out loud, why was this wasted? Why was this not sold and given to the poor? I said the right words. I said it for the poor. That was the cover I had been using for a long time. The poor, the treasury, the responsible management of resources. And it sounded righteous, and it felt righteous. And Jesus looked at me and said, leave her alone. She has done a beautiful thing, the most extravagant act of worship I ever witnessed, and I called it waste. That tells you everything about where I was. When you can no longer recognize extravagant love as beautiful, when you can only see its cost and not its meaning, you are already somewhere very dangerous. He told us that wherever the gospel was preached throughout the whole world, what she did would be told in memory of her. And it has been. And I have been told in the same breath as the one who objected to her love. I want to close with you directly. Not with the people who have everything figured out, with the one who is tired in a way that sleep does not fix. with the one who has been carrying something for years that they have never put into words out loud, with the one who made a choice somewhere in the past that cost them something they cannot get back, and who has been living in the aftermath of that choice for so long that the aftermath has become its own country. I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it honestly, even if only to yourself in the quiet after this video ends. What small betrayal are you in the middle of right now? The kind that has not yet become irreversible, the kind that still has a door back, the kind that you could still choose differently. Leave that answer in the comments if you are willing. Not the detail of it if you want to protect that. Just that you know what it is. Because naming it is the beginning of the thing I never allowed myself to begin. The thing I know now that I did not know in that field is that Jesus was not finished with me when I died. He was never finished with me. The offer that was made on the cross was not rescinded when the rope found me. Some things in the economy of God operate on a timeline that goes beyond what I was able to see from where I was standing. I do not know where I stand in the final accounting. I am not in a position to tell you where I ended up. What I can tell you is that the love I watched him carry to that cross was not small enough to be stopped by what I did. It was not fragile enough to break under the weight of my worst choice. It was not conditional enough to expire when I closed the door from my side. He said of himself that he came not for the healthy but for the sick. He said the shepherd leaves the 99 to go after the one that is lost. I was the most lost person in the story. I was the one most in need of finding. And if the cross was large enough to hold what I did in its radius of forgiveness, then whatever you have done, whatever weight you have been carrying through the years, it is inside that radius too. And before I go, there is one more thing I want to leave in your hands. The prayer that moved mountains in the early church. That power did not disappear. It was not a relic of another age. It was a set of keys that were given and that can still be found. Heaven's code holds those 3 keys in a form that can be opened today, wherever you are, whatever state your faith is in, whatever has gone cold or distant or silent. People have been picking up those keys and finding that the door still opens. The link is in the pinned comment below this video. If what I have told you today has landed somewhere real in you, go there. Share this with someone who needs to hear what I had to learn the hardest way possible. The most important truth I can leave you with is not about me. It is about what I saw in the moments before I could not take any more of seeing it. I saw a man dying for people who had just watched him suffer and felt nothing. I saw love extended across the most complete failure imaginable. I saw the door I believed was closed, standing wide open, with light coming through it, with his voice somewhere on the other side of it, still speaking my name. Whatever you believe you have done that cannot be undone, let me tell you from the only position I can speak from, which is the worst case in history. The door is still open. Walk through it while you still can. That is the one thing I wish someone had made me truly believe before I ran out of time to believe it.